Nearly everyone is familiar with the Amityville Horror House, where 22-year-old Ronald Defoe killed his parents and 4 younger siblings. Even more terrifying was the murder castle of H.H. Holmes, a hotel built for Chicago's World's Fair held in 1893. Here, among a warren of hidden passageways and windowless rooms, he murdered an untold number of guests. Every house has a legacy, but if the walks could talk in the houses listed below, they would scream. So here are 10 infamous and terrifying houses of murder. Number 10, Fox Hollow Farm, Westfield, Indiana. Despite racking up a considerable number of victims, serial killer Herb Baumeister isn't what you might call a household name. Probably because he committed suicide as investigators closed in. Despite a diagnosis of schizophrenia and a history of bizarre behavior, Baumeister founded a chain of thrift stores and became quite wealthy. He purchased a sprawling 18-acre estate outside Indianapolis, Indiana, called Fox Hollow Farm. It was here that he perpetrated much of his carnage, picking up young men at gay bars and bringing them home to meet their doom. When authorities searched Fox Hollow Farm, they discovered the remains of 11 men, mostly charred bone fragments. He would later be linked to several other unsolved murders committed while he was on business trips. Horrified by what her husband had done, Julie Baumeister moved her 3 children out of the home. Property stood empty for years, plagued by its fiendish legacy. The estate was purchased by Rob and Vicki Graves, who claimed to see the dismembered ghosts of Baumeister's victims. They even discovered more bones on the property. A tenant who lived in an apartment on the farm actually claimed to have encountered the spirit of Herb Baumeister himself, even supposedly recording his voice. Number 9, the Cleveland Strangler Murder House, 12205 Imperial Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. Anthony Soul's criminally violent behavior appeared from an early age. He raped his niece when he was just 11 years old. He went on to have a decorated career in the U.S. Marine Corps, but shortly after returning to civilian life, he assaulted a female visitor to his home. The offense earned him 15 years in prison for attempted rape. Upon his release in 2005, he got up to his same old tricks. For a couple of years, he dated Lori Fraser, the niece of Cleveland's mayor. Fraser would later claim that she smelled putrid odors at the house, which Soul variously blamed on his stepmother, who also lived at the house, and a nearby sausage factory. In September 2009, Soul attacked and raped a woman at his home. She reported it to the police, who came to the house on October 29th. The Cleveland Strangler wasn't home, but they discovered 2 corpses in the living room. Soul was arrested 2 days later. Between the house and the backyard, the remains of 11 women were found. Unfortunately for those in the mood to go sightseeing at Anthony Sowell's House of Horror, the city's elected to demolish it to respect the memory of the victims. Sowell himself languishes on death row. Number 8, Conrad Keene House, 228 East Oglethorpe Avenue, Savannah, Georgia. The red brick row house was built in 1842. Pulitzer Prize winner Conrad Akeen's family, originally from New England, moved to Savannah, where his father became a prominent surgeon. The family was wealthy and respected, but his father was mentally ill and exhibited strange behavior, which culminated on February 27th, 1901. Conrad, just 11 at the time, heard his parents arguing about money, then heard gunshots. He investigated and found his parents' bodies. His father had shot his wife before turning the gun on himself. Conrad and his siblings were sent to live with relatives. Many years later, he came back to Savannah and actually purchased the house next door to the one where his parents died. He was a frequent visitor to Bonaventure Cemetery, where they were buried. Akeen died in 1973 at age 84. Today, the house is owned by Dr. Jackson Morgan, who allowed paranormal investigators to explore the property. They recorded a series of eerie floating orbs and voices, suggesting that the Akeens may still indeed dwell on Oglethorpe Avenue. Number 7, Glensheen Mansion, 3300 London Road, Duluth, Minnesota. Glensheen is a beautiful Cuban mansion overlooking Lake Superior. It was built in 1905 by Chester Kongdong, who made a vast fortune in the mining industry. When died, the property went to their daughter Elizabeth, who adopted 2 children. Marjorie and Jennifer. Marjorie was a problem child diagnosed as a sociopath early in life. She had several children and drifted between men, mooching off them or off their mother. In a crime scene that seemed as if it were taken directly from a Clue board game, Elizabeth Kongdong and her nurse Velma Patila were found dead in one of the mansion's bedrooms. Kongdong had been smothered with a pillow, and Patila had been bludgeoned with a candlestick. Suspicion immediately fell on Marjorie, who stood an inheritance sum $8 million upon her mother's passing, and on her second husband, Roger Caldwell. Roger was convicted of the murder in 1978, but Marjorie was inexplicably acquitted. Caldwell was released after just 5 years. Shortly thereafter, he committed suicide, leaving a note proclaiming his innocence. In the years since, Marjorie has been linked to crime from arson to bigamy, and has been suspected of being involved in at least 2 murders. Today, the 39-room Glensheen Historic Estate is owned by the University of Minnesota and is operated as a museum. It's even a wedding destination. For many years, guides were instructed to gloss over the brutal specifics of the murders, but these days they are open to discussing them. Number 6. Andrea Gacys House, 942 Beachcomber Lane, Houston, Texas. We often derive our greatest comfort and love from our mothers, so when we hear of a woman killing her own children, something primitive and horrible stirs in us. On June 20th, 2001, Andrea Yates, a woman with a dark history of mental illness, drowned all 5 of her children, aged 6 months to 7 years, in the bathtub of her home in Houston, Texas. A house with such an ugly past could conceivably sit empty for decades. Few people would want to live in any murder house, much less one where 5 innocent children lost their lives. But just 3 years later, the pretty house sold for $87,000. The new owner, Peter Muller, said, "It's in a good location, plus it's got a great layout. There's a living area and combined dining area." The curious still drive past for a glimpse. When asked, Muller said, "I don't really care about the home's history. It doesn't really bother me." Number 4. Kreischer Mansion, 4500 Arthur Kill Road, Staten Island, New York. Nothing good happened in Staten Island. Gacys Mansion is easily the creepiest looking residence on this list. A rambling giant Victorian complete with a turret. The mansion was built in 1885 for Edward Kreischer by his father, a German brickmaker. By 1894, the family business was in steep decline. Distraught, Edward shot himself in the head at home. This in and of itself would be an ugly stain on the property, but Edward Kreischer's suicide was far less chilling than an event that happened over a century later. In 2005, the mansion's caretaker, Joseph Young, murdered a man named Robert McClevley on the orders of the Bonomo crime family. He initially attempted to strangle McClevley, but the victim broke away. So Young caught up with McClevley, stabbed himself, and drowned him in a pool. He then chopped the corpse to pieces with a hacksaw and burned them in the mansion furnace. Young was sentenced to life in prison. Kreischer Mansion is said to be swarming with ghosts. The most vocal seems to be Kreischer's widow, who can be heard weeping in grief. Unlike many of the other houses on this list, which are either occupied or destroyed, this mansion is currently on the market for around $1.5 million. Number 4, Mercer Williams House, 429 Bull Street, Savannah, Georgia. The beautiful Mercer Williams House was built between 1860 and 1868, with construction stalled while the Civil War raged. It changed hands several times and it served as a Shriner's temple. At least 2 people died in accidents at the property, including a young boy who fell off the roof and was impaled on an iron railing. The house was empty until 1969 when it was purchased by Jim Williams, a young preservationist and antiques dealer. It took 2 years to return the property to its former splendor. Williams was known for throwing huge, elaborate parties and a tradition which went on until 1981, when Jim shot his assistant. Williams claimed he acted in self-defense against 21-year-old Danny Hansford, but he was charged with murder. During the trial, it emerged that the two men had been having an affair. Williams endured 4 trials over the course of 8 years before he was finally acquitted. Rumor says a voodoo pact helped assure his freedom. Upon his release, Williams returned to his famous parties, but he did not have long to celebrate. He died of complications from pneumonia 8 months later. His body was supposedly discovered in the exact spot where he had fallen. The exact spot he would have fallen had Danny Hansford shot him. This story is retold in John Benderid's novel Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which was later adapted into a movie. Veteran actor Kevin Spacey portrayed Jim Williams. Today, the house is owned by Williams' sister, Dorothy Kingery, who maintains it as a museum. Number 3, Manson's Family Murder House. 10050 Lyle Drive, Los Angeles, California. On August 9, 1969, members of the Manson family attacked the residents of this house, making for one of the most notorious crimes in American history. With orders from Manson to make the scene as gruesome as he can, 4 members slaughtered pregnant actress Sharon Tate and 4 other victims. Tate was said to have begged for the life of her unborn child, but was stabbed 16 times. The cultist wrote the word pig on the front door in her blood. The house's owner, talent agent Rudy Atogley, moved into the ranch-style property a few weeks afterward and lived there for 20 years. Reporting no particular maleficent on the site. He sold the house for $1.6 million. The final resident at 10050 Kyle was rock musician Trent Reznor, founder of 9 Inch Nails. He built a recording studio there, naming it The Pig after the bloody graffiti. Here he recorded his hit album, The Downward Spiral. He moved out of the house in December 1993, taking the front door as a memento of his stay. Reznor later said there was too much history in that house for me to handle. The following year, the house was razed and a new mansion built in its place. The current owner is TV producer Jeff Franklin, who helped such shows as Full House and Malcolm in the Middle. Number 2, John Wayne Gacys House, 8213 Summerdale Avenue, Norwood Park Township, Illinois. The suburbs are well known for nosy and complaining neighbors, but apparently those who lived close to Gacy were well versed in minding their own business. They didn't respond at all to the stench of rotting bodies that wafted from his house. When Gacy's own wife questioned the odor, he claimed that they had dead mice in the crawl space. He was half right. Beneath their house, he buried the bodies of 26 young men. Other bodies filled the garbage and the garage and backyard. Police uncovered the first corpse on December 21st, 1978. It took some 3 months to fully excavate the property due to a brutal Chicago winter. During the process, much of the house was destroyed, eventually yielding 29 bodies, some of which remain unidentified to this day. In April 1979, the structure was razed. The property was empty for years, but a house was eventually built on the site. The address slightly altered to discourage tourists of macabre. Gacy was executed by lethal injection on May 10th, 1994. His last words were, "Kiss my ass." And number 1, Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Cannibal killer Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, took lives in several locations, including his grandmother's house. She kicked him out due to a parade of men arriving at all hours and the wrenched smell emanating from his room. But the majority of the killing happened at his Milwaukee apartment. Here he found it easy to lure young men with offers of money for sexual favors. Once there, he would drug them with sleeping pills and visit upon their flesh his horrifying paraphernalia. He kept body parts in his refrigerator for later consumption. The torsos, however, he immersed in a 57-gallon drum of acid. Bizarrely enough, police had once visited Dahmer's apartment after one of his victims escaped. He convinced the officers that they had been in the midst of a lover's quarrel. The officers briefly entered the apartment, and though they noticed the disgusting smell, they did nothing to act on it. Dahmer was eventually caught on July 22, 1991. after yet another potential victim escaped. Details about the human trophies found in the house are perhaps too hideous to recount. Neighbors gathered outside, watching in shock as officers' hazmat suits carried out the remains. The evil that took place in the building dictated that it could not stand for long. Community outreach programs helped residents find alternative housing. In November 1992, the structure was demolished, and today it is nothing but a weed-choked vacant lot. Well, good luck sleeping tonight.